So the thing about the word woke is it harkens back to that old story we all read and were taught when we were growing up, the boy who cried wolf. These days, it's the boy who cried woke. There is so much disingenuous criticism using the word woke. The word is so liberally applied to every...
This is why we banned it on the subreddit, by the way, for a while. Is because people use the word woke the same as they use the word, like, racist or, like, a few other things. Where it's like, this is, like, basically it's like a filler word because I don't know how to actually define what the problem is. So I'm just going to use, like, this bucket word that somehow is going to apply. DEI is the new woke? Yeah, DEI is... Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to define the problems we're seeing with the game industry right now, and I'm going to do it without using the terms DEI or woke. And so what I came up with is I took a definition of game development and then I assumed the beliefs of game developers, and I went to ChatGPT and I told them to combine these two things, ChatGPT, and I'll show you what they came up with. And this is my definition of game development, is they come up with an idea, they get funding, the development's 2 to 8 years, they market the game, they release the game and it has a net loss. Investors absorb the net loss and then the cycle repeats. Now, I'm not saying this is all game development, but we're seeing a similar process to this with major AAA studios, as some people like to call it. And so I just wanted something representative of the AAA studios that seem to be struggling. And so this is what ChatGPT came up with from me defining their beliefs and giving them this process. Now, we're going to list the beliefs after I show you what ChatGPT came up with, because I want you to ask yourself, does this sound familiar? So here's what ChatGPT came up with. Conceptualization, ideological hiring, and leveraging established IPs. The game studio begins with an idea for a new game, often deeply rooted in the developer's ideological framework. If the studio adheres to deterministic beliefs, the game becomes more than just entertainment. It's seen as a tool to influence or reprogram gamers, whom developers view as shaped by free market conditioning. In this phase, the developers target established IPs to build upon, utilizing the existing fan base to increase interest and ensure a broader platform for their ideological mission. So that's talking about, see, they're ideologically motivated and they're exploiting established IPs for whatever they're trying to sell, basically. So hiring practices. The studio hires staff aligned with its ideological goals, prioritizing shared values over market-driven skills. Developers are chosen for their commitment to spreading a particular worldview through their work. The use of well-known IPs is crucial here, as it allows developers to infuse these beloved franchises with their ideological perspective, reshaping the narrative to fit their goals without dissent from the internal team. So this is saying they're repurposing an IP and they're hiring in such a way that no one inside the company will object. And that's like toxic positivity. Like, people are trying to coin that term. So IP leverage By using established franchises, developers aim to attract an audience already loyal to the IP. However, they often modify the original themes and characters to align with their mission, which may alienate existing fans of the franchise. So, like Tomb Raider is just an obvious example. Okay, securing funding by any means. To fund development, the studio engages in manipulative practices or gaslighting to secure investors. Backing the game is presented as commercially viable, focusing on the established IP's popularity, even though the developer's primary intent is to spread ideological messages rather than achieve commercial success. Manipulation of investors. Developers craft persuasive narratives that emphasize the popularity of the IP and downplay the risk associated with changing its core themes. The developers may exaggerate the potential financial success, presenting the project as aligned with popular trends, while hiding the fact that the ideological overhaul may not resonate with the traditional fans. So, like I said, this is all ChatGPT that it came up with this. But basically it's saying, okay, we're going to take an established IP. We're going to lie to investors that the direction we're taking it is going to be super popular and make money. And we're doing it at the expense of the possible interest of the original fans of the IP. That's all stuff ChatGPT came up with. So development over 2 to 8 years. During the development phase, which can last anywhere from 2 to 8 years, the focus is on embedding ideological content within the game. The use of established IPs offer a wide-reaching platform, but the game is subtly re-engineered to reflect the developer's beliefs. Developers aim to use the game to challenge gamers' worldviews, believing the game can reshape the player's perspective through exposure to ideological themes. Blocking dissent and feedback. During this long development process, feedback from testers or the public may be blocked or ignored. Developers, believing that any criticism comes from gamers too conditioned by the free market, dismiss it. They may engage in gaslighting tactics, telling testers or fans that their negative reactions are due to misunderstanding the game's deeper value or purpose. So, people have talked about Ubisoft ignoring feedback from internal testers and definitely attacking fans for feedback from the marketing. And this is saying, oh, their fans are mad because they're conditioned by the free market to believe the wrong stuff. And they don't understand our game serves a greater purpose. So we're just going to ignore the fans. That was all ChatGPT, by the way. I didn't tell it to write that. When it's time, okay, marketing and blocking criticism. When it's time to market the game, developers heavily control the narrative and actively block or dismiss criticism. Given the use of a beloved IP, they rely on pre-existing fan enthusiasm, even if they know the game's content diverges significantly from the original vision. Any criticism of these ideological changes is dismissed as being the result of conditioning or ignorance. So they assume all criticism of the game is because somehow the customer has been psychologically conditioned to think the way that they do, not that they have a legitimate opinion. That's what ChatGPT came up with. Gaslighting in marketing. Marketing campaigns often emphasize the established IP's legacy while downplaying any significant changes. Trailers and promotional materials may be misleading or promising an experience similar to the original franchise, despite the developer's intentions to transform the IP to fit their goals. Early critics, especially those pointing out ideological bias, are gaslighted into believing they're misrepresenting the game, or that their complaints stem from unwillingness to accept changes. So, doesn't that kind of sound like Assassin's Creed Shadows to anyone else? So, release and commercial failure. Upon release, the game often fails to recoup its cost because the radical ideological shifts alienate the fan base of the IP. Gamers expecting an experience aligned with the original franchise are disappointed by the deviation in themes and narratives, leading to poor sales and negative feedback, killing interest in the IP. The misuse of beloved franchises not only lands to the game's commercial failure, but also damages the public's interest in the IP itself. Fans feeling betrayed may lose trust in future projects associated with franchise. This erodes the long-term value of the IP in the market, kind of like how Star Wars and Marvel are. Like, nobody cares about a Star Wars and Marvel game anymore. Blaming gamers. Again, entirely made up by ChatGPT with the information I fed it. In response to the failure, developers blame the gamers, claiming that the audience is too entrenched in their free market thinking to appreciate the deeper ideological messages. Developers may gaslight the public, framing the commercial failure as evidence of the gamer's inability to engage with complex or challenging ideas, rather than recognizing the disconnect between the product and the market's expectations. Developers paid and investors absorb the losses. Despite the commercial failure, developers face no financial consequences. They have already been paid during the game's development, and any losses are absorbed by the investors who were misled into believing that the project had broader market appeal. Since the developers were compensated upfront, there is no need for reflection on the game's failure, allowing them to continue without accountability. Okay, lack of accountability. The insulation from financial consequences means developers can continue their ideological pursuits without having to adjust their approach to the established IP. Once a valuable asset becomes a casualty of the developer's broader mission, and the developers remain focused on spreading their beliefs rather than producing marketable content. Okay, this is the last part. The cycle repeats. Once the game fails, the studio moves on to the next project, often repeating the same cycle. They secure new funding from investors, sometimes using the same established IP or a similar one, and begin another long development process on spreading ideological content rather than commercial success. Each failure reinforces the developer's beliefs that external forces rather than their own approach are to blame. So the game developers blame everyone else. Reinforced ideological commitment. Rather than recognizing the flaws in their strategy, developers double down on their ideological commitment. They use the next project as another opportunity to try and influence gamers, convinced that their failure lies with the audience lack of receptivity rather than with the product itself. Investors still unaware of the real causes behind the repeated failures continue funding these projects without allowing the cycle to perpetuate without change. Allowing the cycle to perpetuate without change. That kind of describes a company like Ubisoft, in my opinion. So, what beliefs did I say that game developers have? I said game developers are hardcore determinists. So they believe in determinism. They believe everything is the result of a kind of domino effect. So because everything is the result of a domino effect, then you make certain assumptions like there is no free will. So I didn't say that I didn't say for ChatGPT to assume there is no free will. But that is an important component to this. But that's what hardcore determinism denotes. And then I said that they believe in blank slate theory. So that's the idea that you assume everyone is a blank slate, that if you took one person and they lived a life identical to another person, in every respect, they would be an identical person to the first person because everyone's a blank slate. It's outside influence that determines everything about who you are. That's sort of what blank slate theory is. And we've seen this especially applied to a lot of gender-related ideological arguments about transgenderism and stuff. And that's kind of where this stuff comes from. But they assume everyone's a blank slate. They assume people don't have free will. And then I said, they are Marxists. And that's pretty much all I had to say for ChatGPT to come up with this whole, they are being manipulated by the free market. And if you know something about Marxism, it kind of, like, these kind of go under that. Like, it's typical for Marxists to have these kind of beliefs. But I just wanted to make sure that ChatGPT understood these kinds of ideas. And when you combine these two things, you start seeing an industry that almost appears identical to what we are seeing flounder around right now. Now, you can debate about if ChatGPT's description of the game development process is at all accurate, or if terms I've used are accurate or not, or if my definitions of things are accurate or not. But I would say we see something almost identical with what's been happening with, like, Ubisoft and to some extent Sony and other major AAA developers. Even on a tiny scale, Nintendo and Microsoft, but to a much less extreme degree. So I want you to give me your opinion. Go ahead, call me wrong. and I'd love to be corrected on anything, and I'd love a better understanding of anything. But my main point is, you don't have to use these terms woke or DEI or anything when it's very easy to just give a definition of what these game developers believe.